Fifth round wide receiver Bub Means might not have the most direct path to the New Orleans Saints roster, but he has the most path options out of any rookie this season. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, Ross Jackson, your New Orleans native, New Orleans Saints expert, and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're taking a look at Bub Means, the New Orleans Saints fifth round selection wide receiver out of Pitt. We're going to take a look at why nuance and sustainability would take his game to the next level, where it is that he's pro ready, including his ability to go up and get it. And we're going to kick everything off by just introducing you to all of the different paths that Bub Means has to make this roster, with a little bit of help from my good friend Christopher Carter from over at Locked On Steelers. We appreciate you very much, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. And for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at Monopoly Go. I've got a competitive side and it absolutely loves Monopoly Go. It's the mobile hit twist on the classic Monopoly game that you know and love. So join your friends and download it now for free. Monopoly Go. You can find it on the App Store and Google Play. Bub Means might not be the player with the most direct path to a starting role on the roster when it comes to this year's rookie class. Obviously, that's Taliese Fuaga, who looks like he's ready to start on the offensive line somewhere, wherever there ends up being an opening for him. But when you look at Bub Means, this is a guy that's got a lot of different paths to make the roster because of all of the things that he can do. So I reached out to a good friend of mine, Christopher Carter, who hosts Locked On Steelers, but also is a Pitt beat reporter as well, for a little bit of information on Bub Means. I want to share that with you first, and it will kind of catalog all the different ways that Bub Means could make the 53-man roster. Here's Chris.
I've covered Bub Means, the new Saints wide receiver, for the past 2 years of his collegiate career. What I can tell you you're getting Bub Means is you're getting a great athlete at the wide receiver position. 6'1", 212. He's got a decent size for a wide receiver. He's stocky, but he runs really well with his size. He's also very strong, not easy to bully at the line of scrimmage. He ran a 4.43 in this offseason that was timed for his. He had a relative athletic score of 9.35. He is a great specimen to have at wide receiver. Granted, his numbers weren't elite at Pitt, but that wasn't really as much of his fault because Pitt just had bad quarterback play for the last 2 years. But this past year, he led the team with 721 receiving yards on 41 catches for 6 touchdowns. But Bub Means is also going to be a versatile guy that can offer you a lot on special teams. He can play the gunner position. He can return punts. He can return kicks. And again, he's a bigger bodied guy who can play kind of a more physical role at wide receiver. He loves to block. He's also a guy that can be dangerous with the ball in his hands. And he's a guy that Pitt relied upon to make big plays at different times. And someone that when I was going through the draft process, I talked to several people across the league. There were a lot of people that thought he could be a late round steal. And it looks like the Saints are going to get a chance to see if Bub Means will live up to the hype. But as a person who covered Bub Means, I think he's a heck of an athlete. I think he's got a lot of potential. And I'll tell you this also, he's great in the locker room. He's a leader. He's a positive personality, and people feed off of his positive personality. So Saints, I think you got a good one in Pitt wide receiver, Bub Means.
Big shout out to my good friend Christopher Carter for making that available to us. Really appreciate you, buddy. Make sure you go and check out Locked On Steelers as well if you want to know what's going on over there. Obviously, some big stories going on with them, especially when it comes to that quarterback room. But when we take a look at where Bub Means can go with this team and sort of all the different ways that he could potentially make that 53-man roster, Chris laid out about 5 different reasons why you could see this guy making the roster, and they all kind of lead to different ways that he can do it. Let's start off with the wide receiver spot, right? Height, weight, speed, prospect. You hear that all the time. That means good weight, good height, good speed, right? So what you're looking for here at 6'1", 210 plus, he ran one of the better 40 times at any, or as a wide receiver amongst all wide receivers at the combine this year, of over 210 pounds. So he gives you the height, weight, speed. So that means that he gives you a guy that can be a little bit of an explosive threat. He's not the biggest like yards after catch guy, but if you catch him in the open field, he's not getting caught from behind. does a good job using that speed to get open on over routes. We know how much the New Orleans Saints love a good over route for a possession receiver. That's the one to where you cross the field, but you push upfield first and then cross from one side of the field to the other side of the field, kind of rounding off the route as opposed to an in or a dig, which would be kind of a 90-degree angle on the route. So that's one thing that you certainly look at him being able to do, which is quintessential, as a route to run as an outside receiver. So he's got that outside sort of route tree in that way. Then you look at his ability to transition over to the inside as well and operate out of the slot. He's a big physical guy that can make tough catches in traffic. That's a big part of what you got to be able to do in the slot. I asked him if that was something that he was akin to doing or accustomed to doing. He said he played a lot more on the outside, which is backed up by like his snap count numbers and things like that when we talked to him after the draft. But one of the things that he mentioned was that he really wants to kind of get that, like learn that and be a little bit more of a big slot option for a team as well. So we'll see that becomes potentially a second path to the roster for him. So you got the outside and you got the inside as a guy that can come in and help you out at wide receiver. The other thing that you're looking at is special teams. And that's where you get three different paths to the roster: kick return, punt return, and gunner. Not only was this guy the leading wide receiver for Pitt in a season where they had a very down year at quarterback play, as Chris laid out for us, he was also their starting gunner throughout the season as well. So you saw him kind of doing both. And look, that's big for the New Orleans Saints, who lost Isaac Yiadom, who really can't use Alontae Taylor there anymore now that he's starting over on the defensive side. And JT Gray has had some trouble staying healthy over the course of the past few years, even as a special teams captain. So you've got to have guys that are ready to go and in the wings ready to replace at that position in order for you to be able to expand what it is that you do as a punt return or as a punt coverage team. And in him being a guy that can potentially contribute as a punt returner and as a kick returner becomes really important as well, because as a kick returner, with the new kick return rules, you have to have two guys back. And so he becomes an option. A guy like Jermaine Jackson, who is not who you're thinking of, but is the undrafted free agent out of Idaho, he could be an option, along with, of course, Kool-Aid McKinstry, who could be an option next to Rashid Shaheed in those responsibilities. So that's yet another path to the roster. This is why I like this selection a lot for the New Orleans Saints. He wasn't a wide receiver that I really leaned in on over the course of the draft cycle, but when you really kind of dig into his numbers, he should have been on more radars. And as Chris says it sounds like he was on a lot of the NFL's radars as a potential day 3 sleeper. So hopefully the New Orleans Saints ended up putting themselves in position to be able to take advantage of that. So even though he's not a guy that I would expect to come in and immediately win the X receiver role on the outside, which I believe A.T. Perry should get first run at anyway, it doesn't mean that he's not a guy that can make the roster, and it doesn't mean that he's not a guy that can contribute both on offense and on defense. He's also a very willing blocker, but that's a piece of his game that he's going to have to bolster a little bit over the course of training camp and this summer to really be able to prove that that's another way that he could be utilized when he's out on the field. So that brings me to my next point. Let's take a look at where he's strongest and pro ready, starting off with the fact that confidence has really, really built a path to success for Bub Means, and you can see that over the second half of his season at Pitt. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at Monopoly Go. And the more I play this game, the more I learn about it every single day, because there just seems to be new, changing, all kinds of crazy environments, timed tournaments that include mini games and stuff like that. New ways for you to pick on your friends and for your friends to mess with me. I got Cody Roark from Locked On Broncos coming in and trashing my city now. So there's a whole bunch of stuff, or trashing my board. But there's a whole bunch of stuff that you're able to do with this. I love collectibles. You can collect a bunch of stickers that you can even trade with friends. Kind of like that old like Pocket Monster game that we all used to play. You feel me? All that kind of stuff. And then collect the albums so that you can win a bunch of prizes. And then they also have now a bunch of time tournaments that have a bunch of mini games in there as well, like digging for treasure and robot pachinko machines and all that stuff. So it just feels endless, the amount of different things you can do, along with the different boards that you can play on and all this other stuff. So if you haven't checked it out yet, I highly, highly recommend that you take the time now and discover how fun Monopoly Go is. Go ahead, get off the bench and go download it now. Monopoly Go on Google Play or the App Store today. All right, right, family, when we talk about breakout players, we always talk about momentum at the end of the previous season. And while Bub Means probably shouldn't be in the breakout conversation just yet, he certainly should be in the ready to surprise his rookie year conversation because of the momentum that he picked up at the end of his final year at Pitt. We appreciate you very much as always. Making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to go and check out Locked On Sports today for all the biggest stories around the world of sports from the local experts that know the team the best. The first ever national sports 24/7 stream on YouTube. So go and check it out today. Locked On Sports today on YouTube. You can also find it on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app as well. So I wanted to run down some of the things that I think are the pluses for Bub Means. I'm not going to do what I've kind of done in the last couple of episodes where we looked at like Taliese Fuaga and Kool-Aid McKinstry and Spencer Rattler. We were talking about the things that make them pro ready. I'm going to kind of throttle down on that now that we're into the day 3 selections, because I think we got to be realistic here, right? Like, not every draft class is full of Pro Bowlers. Not every draft class is full of all pros. In fact, my bold prediction is that this draft class turns out to be pretty good for the New Orleans Saints, but none of them are rookie Pro Bowlers or rookie all pros because they're just not going to get that recognition. But they all end up contributing in some way that ends up, or at least the top guys end up contributing in places where it moves the needle for the team as a whole, but maybe not necessarily the individual from a recognition standpoint. And that's okay. You don't need recognition if the team is doing good things. The recognition comes in the win-loss record, and that needs to be everybody on this New Orleans Saints team, coaching staff, roster. That has to be their focus. All right, accidental soapbox there. My apologies. But let's take a look here at Bub Means and what it is that he ends up bringing. So one of the things that I wanted to highlight was sort of the momentum that he picked up at the end of his season last year. He's a guy that went from pulling together and being a good piece for the team early on in the year, but didn't necessarily get to the point of really kind of standing out until a little bit later. He didn't score his first touchdown of the season until week 5. He scored 6 total touchdowns, did that between week 5 and week 13. So over the course of those last 8 games, he really got his momentum. Starting at that same time, he went over at least 60 receiving yards in all 8 of his last games, over 70 in 6 of those last 8, and then also pulled together a 109-yard receiving game against Wake Forest, pulled together a 95-yard receiving game against Florida State, 85 yards against Duke as well towards the end. So you could really feel the momentum pushing toward the end of the season for this guy, including games like Syracuse, where he also averaged 35.5 yards per catch because he had 2 catches for 71 yards. He was just, a big play machine. And this is a guy that had at least 1 catch of over 20 yards in 10 different games last season while appearing in just 12 games. So he was a bit of a big play factory for Pitt, and that momentum really started to pick up at the end of the year. And you like to see that momentum for a rookie coming into the NFL because it builds a little bit of confidence for them, and you could see the confidence breeding success at the collegiate level. And I think that same level of confidence, if he can bring that into not necessarily like the confidence of like, yeah, I'm going to be the team's number 1 receiver, blah, 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 blah. But like if he walks into training camp with that confidence and saying, yeah, I've got what I need. I have the tools to make it at the next level, develop, learn, get better, sharpen my tools, all those other things, and push with confidence behind all that, then he's a lot more likely to achieve those things and start to check off all of those boxes that then get him out on the field. So let's take a look at some of the things that I really like about him. Obviously, big target with great reach, 33 and a quarter inch arms. The reason why that's important is actually that when you look at his arm length of 33 and a quarter, that's technically longer than Taliese Fuaga, who comes in at 33 and an eighth. Now, 33 and an eighth is fine. That's good for an offensive lineman. 33 and a quarter is really good for a wide receiver when you consider sort of the comparison of like what you're looking for in an offensive lineman's reach and what this guy brings to the table. So I really enjoy kind of looking at the potential that he has with catch radius at the next level and all those other things. It doesn't necessarily translate from college to the pros all the time because the game's a little bit different. Coverage is a little bit tighter. Coverages are different, all those other things. But I mean, it's a really, really good skill to have and to walk in with, and he definitely has that. He's also got safe hands, 7.2% drop rate over the course of his career. That's really, really solid. on a wide receiver as well. We mentioned good speed at 210 plus pounds, one of the fastest 40s for any wide receiver in this year's combine that hit that mark. Does a really good job positioning himself to make plays. So that kind of gets you into that big play machine of, those 10, 20, 10 games of at least one catch of 20 plus yards in the 12 games that he appeared. I think that's one of those pieces there. But the other thing is that he's a good box out guy. He'll box you out with that big frame and then go up and get it, because on top of everything that he adds with that speed, with the size and all that, he's also got a 39.5-inch vertical, a near 40-inch vertical. So he's able to really go ahead, get up, and go get it. And I think that's a big thing that the New Orleans Saints continue to want. One of the things that Dennis Allen said last year, so after the 2022 season, was that when they lost Michael Thomas after that Panthers game early on, that they felt like they just didn't have that contested catch guy. Then you get into this season, there is no there is no Michael Thomas, right? He's still a free agent at the moment, still rehabbing and all those other things, I'm sure. That means you're probably still looking for that contested catch guy. Now, A.T. Perry showed that he can get some of that done in the jump ball situations, but remember, we talked about contested catches being not just every jump ball. Every jump ball is a contested catch. Every 50-50 ball is a contested catch, but not every contested catch is a jump ball. And that's where a guy like this can maybe make some differences for you in terms of boxing out and doing all those other things. And then seeing him be able to fight through contact on comebacks and stuff like that would be nice too. But there's some other things with the comebacks and hitches and all those other things that we'll get to in a moment that I think that fall under the nuance idea of what's got to get better in his game. He's a willing blocker, though he's not super consistent there just yet. But I think that's a spot where he's going to get worked and reps and reps, because that's going to be a big part of what gets him out on the field, is if he's able to go out there and run block as well, especially if he does start learning sort of that big slot role, quote unquote, then that's a big one. Because again, in that outside zone offense, or that outside zone heavy offense, what do we always talk about? Expanding and stretching that offensive line as far laterally as you can. And so having those wide receivers that can block kind of gives you that opportunity. He's got the inside-outside versatility. Back in 2022, when Jordan Addison was still in the building, he played 314 snaps in the slot last year. On the outside, 563 snaps. And so you could see that in 2022, he had a slot role, and in 2023, he had an outside role. And don't get me wrong, in 2022, he played out wide quite a bit as well, but you saw more of his snaps come from the slot that year. So that's where that inside-outside versatility comes from. And look, I know that it doesn't translate from college to the pros. Okay, I want to be really careful about this. But a 50% contested catch rate last year in 2023, when you get 22 contested catch options, the quarterback play was not good in Pittsburgh last year, but coming down with 11 out of 22 of them things, pretty good. If nothing else, knowing that rate is not translatable to the NFL, if nothing else, he's got the mentality to go up and get it. And that was one of the things that he told us in his Zoom call with us, is that those types of contested catches, things like that, just as much as it's a physical trait, it's almost more so a mentality over anything else. So you love to see that. Speaking of mentality, I think that there's some mentality stuff for Bub Means that will help him create sustainability and nuance, which are the two things that he needs to add to his game to take it to the next level. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and in the NHL. So let FanDuel make sure that you get to take home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers will get $150 in bonus bets by simply winning any $5 bet. All you got to do is be a new customer, $5 down on a heavy favorite in the NBA or NHL playoffs. And then that's $150 in bonus bets coming your way that you can use on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. I even had somebody tell me that they wanted to bet on Kool-Aid McKinstry as Defensive Rookie of the Year. Yeah, clearly the hype is real. Plus 2,800 odds on that one, though. So do what you want, bud. But I would say if you're going to do that, and you're a new customer, go and get the new bonus bets first, and then go and put that down. So you can go check them out today at FanDuel.com/lockedon to make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Bub Means has a lot of stuff that should make him ready to develop at the next level, but there are a couple of things in his game that he'll need to clean up, and a lot of it comes down to nuance or kind of polish and sustainability. So let's break it all down here as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Don't forget, we are your team every day. So coming up in tomorrow's episode, we're taking a look at Jalen Ford. We're also going to break down a little bit of what we think that linebacker room could shake out to be. Before we continue here with Bub Means, I want to just give you a quick news update. The New Orleans Saints have signed defensive back Will Harris, who has done a ton all around defensive secondaries for the Detroit Lions. He had his best season back in 2021, where he played in the slot, in the box, at free safety, at corner, just kind of did everything, even had a start at linebacker, I believe. And so he's just one of those guys that's going to be able to come in, help compete at the strong safety spot opposite Tyrann Mathieu. The Saints are building up their options in the secondary, and we'll see where everything goes. But definitely a talented player, and definitely the type of player that you look at in terms of a good fit for Dennis Allen and the New Orleans Saints because of his versatility and ability to be able to move kind of all over the place. So let's get back to Bub Means here. Look, I think nuance and sustainability are going to be big for Means and his ability to be able to kind of fit in, develop, and grow as an NFL wide receiver. I think when we talk about nuance, let's start there. So nuance and polish kind of comes into the route running side of things. You see a lot of kind of false steps when he's got to throttle down and work his way back to the quarterback. We were talking earlier about the contested catch stuff. Can he win those contested catches on the comebacks, on the hitches, on the curls, things like that, to where he's not, a 50-50 ball where you're trying to like plant your feet and then go up and win on a jump ball. I mean, can you outfight the corner or the safety, if you're in the slot sometimes, safety or linebacker, who is crashing down on you and trying to make a stop when you're coming back towards the quarterback and fighting back towards the ball? I think that becomes a big part of the question mark of where you want to see a little bit of that game come in. And so where that game comes in is all about also how he breaks that route down. And sometimes you see a lot of false steps, a lot of chopping of the feet, things like that. I think Keith Williams, the New Orleans Saints' new wide receivers coach, Coach Dub, is going to do a really, really good job with this. He's really good at teaching route running and all those other things. Worked with, Jordan Addison, for also, spent time at USC, Pitt, all those other things. So I think that there's like opportunity there to really kind of see him take some of those steps forward. The other thing that I would look at here is not a lot of elusiveness in the yards after catch game. We talked about his ability to like get the ball to him in space, right? And not a lot of people are going to catch him from behind with that 4.43 speed. That's probably even faster in game speed, or at least faster relative to the other players in game speed. But he's not a guy that's going to be able to kind of like that's necessarily going to build a brand of being a Dante Hall or a Rashid Shaheed or a returner with the ball in his hands or anything like that. Although he does have return experience, but a lot of his return experience is full steam ahead kind of stuff. You know what I mean? And so, and I think that's okay. Like, I think you're okay with that. I don't think that you draft Bub Means because you're looking for a yards after catch threat. You draft Bub Means because you're looking for a big physical dude that's going to go out there and be a dude. Like, that's what you want out of this guy. And I think that becomes a little bit more important. But that is an element of his game that's not fully developed there. We'll see if he's able to take some steps forward. The other thing is that sometimes when you watch his route running and everything, his body just isn't synchronized and everything like that. And so you'll see like a head fake, but then the feet don't mimic that. Or you'll see, a shoulder fake, but then the feet don't mimic that and everything like that. And so just kind of marrying all of it together so that, like, you think about Chris Carter back in the day. I know we just heard from Christopher Carter from Locked On Steelers, but Chris Carter, the former Minnesota Vikings wide receiver, when he would be, running those fly routes, those 9 routes, those vertical routes down the field, one of the things that you would always see him do is that false step in. And when he would do that, it created some of the natural separation, allowed him to be able to get over the top of the corner and then stack the corner so that you can throttle down, slow the corner down, and then accelerate to create some natural separation there when the ball is almost to you. But a big part of the way that he would do that first is that he would give that little fake kind of step in towards the middle of the field to make the receiver think, oh, he might be cutting in on a post or cutting in on a dig or something like that. But when he did that, it wasn't just that he stuck his foot out, right? It was that his foot, shoulder, and head all dipped towards the inside to give the feeling to that DB like, oh, goodness, he's about to cut. You know what I mean? And so you got to be able to sell all that together, but really kind of all three of those zones of your body need to be working at the same time. And it can't just be a step while your upper body is rigid. It can't just be a shoulder fake while your head is staying upfield and then your feet are still going, in vertical mode. It can't just be a head turn, but then not selling it with the rigidity of the rest of your body. Everything's got to work together. And then you got to be able to, fake that juke in. Juke isn't the right word, but kind of fake that step in so that it kind of feels like a little bit of a juke, and then continue to push up field. So I think just kind of seeing all those things marry together, nuance, polish, all that kind of comes together. And I think he'll get the opportunity of that development, of that growth, of that polish working with Coach Dub. The other thing for me is sustainability. So when I talk about sustainability, it really comes down to the blocking game here, holding the run blocks. He's a willing blocker. Like, he'll go in there and put hands on somebody. Like, that ain't no problem for Bub Means. He has no problem doing that at all. But sustaining and holding that block, he just needs a little bit more of the technique, the blocking technique, to be taught to him to kind of get that back under his belt or get that better under his belt so that he becomes a little bit more of a threat as a blocker. And what that allows you to do is, he can go out there and catch passes, but if he can go out there and run protect too and block, in a sustainable fashion, then all of a sudden having him out on the field, you don't really know what the play call is, right? He's not going out, we talked about Keith Kirkwood last year, to where like 70 to, at one point in the season, 70, at an earlier point in the season, 90% of the snaps when he was on the field, it was a run. Like, everybody just kind of knew, like, oh, you going out there to run, everything like that. And I think that there are times where you see the opposite of that, right? The Jimmy Graham effect of like, oh, he's not out here to block. He's out here to be a target, right? And everything. And so I think that like that goes both ways. And so when you're able to go out there and block, and you're able to go out there and run route to make catches, then it just creates a little bit of that uncertainty for the defense, or at least enough lack of certainty for the defense, right? They might not be uncertain, but they're certainly not out there going, well, 95% of the time when this guy is on the field, they're running the football, so we know what's happening here. And so you make them a little bit less certain with all of that. The other thing is I would like to see, and this is just on like some of the tape, I was only able to get like 3 games of his tape, which, by the way, Locked On Saints Insiders, I put some of Bub Means tape in the Google Drive for you as well. If you want to join the Insiders group, you can find the description or the link in the description below, so you can get a hold of some game tape and some film studies and stuff like that. But I got 3 games of his, and one of the things that I noticed in those games is that sometimes he'll kind of like settle in a zone, settle in the pocket of open space in between 2 zone coverage, but not keep working, right? So so the defense will keep working, but then he's not necessarily continuing to work. So just keep working to stay open and find and hold on to those open pockets and stuff like that in zone coverage. And I think that really would go a long way for him as well. So those are things that I think he's got that they'll be focused on working on. I'm sure that there's more on the list and everything too, but I mean, the guy is impressive, really, really impressive. And the bottom line is that he's got a lot of different ways to make the roster, and a lot of different ways here that we just laid out to show viable and sustainable improvements in his game, which might make making the roster even easier for him here in 2024. We appreciate you very much as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day. Don't forget, for your second listen today, go and check out Locked On Pelicans and Locked On LSU with Jake Madison and Caroline Fenton, respectively, so you can see what's going on all around Locked On Louisiana. We appreciate you very much for making Locked On Saints part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.